Back. Let's talk some economics. RBA Governor Philip LOWE says unemployment could fall below 5% if the federal government's COVID recovery effort is successful. Speaking at the National Press Club today, LOWE said the COVID economic downturn was not as deep as it had been anticipated, and that the bounce back began earlier than expected. Joining me to discuss this and all is my regular Wednesday panel from Sydney, the Australian's Adam Creighton, and in Melbourne, the Herald and Weekly Times columnist Terry McCrann. Adam, let's start with Philip LOWE's speech today. All the optimism, the good news there was interest rates, of course, are likely to stay low. But how much of this is certain, do you think, all this optimistic modelling, if we get some sort of major outbreak in another capital city?
Yes, look, I think the irony of the speech was that certainly it was very optimistic. The Reserve Bank said that basically what's happened was far better than what they thought would happen. But of course, the irony with that is that their forecasts in the future are just as fallible as the ones that proved so wrong last year. So we really are in a fog of uncertainty here. I think the Reserve Bank has a problem. It's got this inflation target where it's supposed to have inflation between 2% and 3%, but it hasn't hit it for about 6 or 7 years. And even on the bank's own forecast, it's not going to hit it for another 2 or 3 years. So they're kind of moving around with all these different tools. They don't really know what they're doing, I think. There's another $100 billion of monetary stimulus. I think that's more about keeping the exchange rate low than meeting the inflation target or boosting growth. So, look, I mean, I think it's clearer and clearer that the Reserve Bank doesn't have the sort of control over the consumer price index that they once thought they did.
Terry, what did you think?
Well, let's be very clear, Peter, that the Reserve Bank doesn't have the faintest idea what's actually going to happen over the course of 2021, and nor does anybody else. I mean, we don't know, because it all depends on the vaccine rollout, how effective it is and how quickly it is. When you look at 2021 compared to 2020, 2020 was actually far more predictable because we knew exactly what was happening. We were having these lockdowns. And so in terms of the economic outlook, so we knew exactly what was going to happen. As Adam says, we don't know what's going to happen through the course of 2021. If we get an eruption either in Australia or outside Australia, which forces lockdowns and further disruptions, that's going to have a completely different outlook. I mean, the Reserve Bank is essentially saying we'll assume that the vaccine works and that we won't go back to what we had suffered through 2020. And we just don't know whether that's going to come about.
Yes, I think he might have a bit more faith in some of the premiers, and perhaps I do. Let's go to Victoria. Adam, you have long been on a campaign in relation to our public sector wage bill around the country. The Andrews government, senior public servants here we're talking about, not all the public service. Well, senior public service wages have almost tripled to $320 million over the past year or so. All these numbers of public servants are going up. 1,400 senior executives in the Victorian government departments. It was only in the 600s in 2015. It's extraordinary, 230% pay increase. Tell you what, it's full speed ahead on the Andrews gravy train, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think it's more than extraordinary. I mean, I don't like to use the word too much, but I think it's disgusting, really, and it's symptomatic of a government or a party that's been in power, for a long time. This sort of thing happens on both sides of politics too, Liberal and Labor. Throughout history, you see that after a while there are more and more senior executives building up at the top. But of course, there's lots of empire building in bureaucracies. There's a strong incentive for bureaucrats themselves to have more staff. But these numbers are just extraordinary. And I think maybe a deeper point here is that this is the reason why I think we have all these lockdowns these days, because this class of people is growing in size and wealth, and it's not affected by the lockdowns at all. In fact, you could even argue that they benefit from the lockdowns because, they can work from home, they have guaranteed salaries, they can pick up houses more cheaply. So I think it's a real social problem when you have the top end of the bureaucracy getting so large and so well paid.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have a problem if we're paying on performance, but Victoria's been a basket case, and they all front an inquiry, and cavalcade of, idiot after idiot was there saying, I can't remember, can't recall, all at the behest of a very expensive QC that we're paying for. I just think it's crazy, and I would like to see the Victorian opposition do something about it. Yeah, Terry?
Peter, can I just add, it's obviously not just in Victoria. You're getting exactly the same thing, maybe to a different degree, in every other state. And even at the federal level. So that this is not just pure, I mean, it's exceptional in Victoria, but it's happening in every state. I mean, we saw Campbell Newman valiantly reduced the numbers of public servants in Queensland in his 3-year term, and then they all came back and then doubled up again subsequently.
Yeah, but you've got to split out sort of the public service type interstate level from the public sector employee, which might be a teacher or an ambulance attendant, things like that. So if you can split them out and look at just the public servants, I think you're absolutely right. I might do a bit of homework on that because I think Victoria's growth is exponential compared to the other states, but let's see what I can find out. Terry, I've got to go to a column you wrote today. You labelled short selling a disgrace in the Herald Sun. Tell us why.
Well, I think it fundamentally distorts the functioning of the market. I mean, it's presented as some sort of a theoretical plus, as in adding liquidity to the market, you have more sellers. What we saw on Wall Street with these geeks coming in through GameStop to counter short selling has got its own problems, but I did think it was a nice wake-up call that this was not a one-way street, that only the professionals could play, and by undermining a company's value, sell the stock and buy it back cheaply. This was a no-brainer from their perspective, but it fundamentally, I think, disrupts the real proper functioning of the market, both in terms of raising capital and also providing an avenue for people to trade.
I'll just go to this issue quickly. Former union heavy Paul Howes is now an executive at KPMG, which is a consulting firm for those who are not aware. He's really calling for more permanent skilled migration. We've seen those immigration numbers drop off. This is obviously where we go when we want cheap and easy growth. We've talked about this in the past, Adam. Is this where we're headed now, that there'll be a real push by business to lift migration coming out of COVID?
Well, look, I think there'll probably be a push by business, but maybe not so much by government, given it's increasingly unpopular as we saw these very rapid rates of migration. I mean, it's fallen from about 1.5% a year, which was the fastest rate of immigration, population growth, if you like, in the world. I think in the Western world for many years, it's dropped to 0.2 this year, which is the lowest since 1916, but it is forecast to bounce back to 1% just in a few years. So I think even at 1%, the population of Australia will be growing pretty rapidly. So I don't think we probably need, to encourage it any more than we already are. It's important to emphasise skills, I think, in the immigration program rather than family reunion. But yeah, look, I think it's still too uncertain. There's too much uncertainty at the moment about the demand for international movement given COVID.
I agree, and I think Australians are quite happy for us to take a pause and reassess and get a population plan in place. Wouldn't that be nice? Adam Creighton from the Australian team, MCCRANN from the Herald Sun, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.